What's going on? How you doing?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
Living the dream.
Oh,
That's it.
got my suit rental squared away for the wedding next weekend.
Good
So,
boy.
yeah,
So when is the wedding's next weekend?
next weekend. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And how you feeling?
Feeling. That's
Ready?
one. Yeah. One way to
How
put it.
long how long have you guys been engaged?
A year.
All right, so let's jump into episode 3. And
Yep.
today we are going to be talking about inflation. So Justin, I have a quick question for you. Imagine working 9 to 5 for 50 years and the Fed prints 40% of the total money supply and inflates away 20 years of your work. How do you feel?
Yeah. Well, most people never feel that because they don't even know it's happening. But it does happen to a lot of people who have worked 9 to 5 tirelessly for the entirety of their life, which is sad, but also very deceiving in the way that it all is ultimately played out.
It's a pernicious tax, inflation, and we're going to get into what that all means and how it all happens. I would say that people do feel it. They just don't know. They can't put their finger on it in the sense that things are going up and people will complain about prices going up, but they have no clue about the mechanism behind what causes prices to go up. People think a little bit about it. They'll just say, well, capitalists are greedy and they just want more money. But that's not exactly the case.
Yep, the media does a great job of highlighting all of the secondary issues that show up immediately after or very shortly after the creation of new dollars. And the greedy capitalist excuse is one that
That,
is most definitely pushed.
that's it. So to start this off, I want to play a clip of Jerome Powell being interviewed about what he did when happened. And let me see if I can pull this up here.
I get a great kick out of the like the YouTube like money printer go burr when you just type that into the search bar. It's just like
simply flooded the system with money.
Yes, we did. That's another way to think about it. We did.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
We printed digitally. So we as a central bank, we have the ability to create money digitally, and we do that by buying treasury bills or bonds or other government guaranteed securities, and that actually increases the money supply. We also print actual currency, and we distribute that through the Federal Reserve Bank.
Simply flooded the system with money.
So simply flooded the system. We
yeah.
printed it digitally. We increased the money supply. And we have a mandate to keep prices stable and make sure we have as maximum employment. How much sense does that make?
Not a lot, but there is one way to kind of frame this up. Because again, if I had watched that video probably 3 years ago, 2 years ago, somewhere in that area, I wouldn't have ever been like, okay, why'd you just show me that? But a way that I don't know if someone explained this to me or if I just kind of culminated it myself. But if you think about like a town, like a singular town, and you've got your basic like butcher, shoemaker, car salesman, insurance broker, whatever. Think about that like town, like a small 100-person town, right? Year one, all these prices are at whatever levels they're at. Then you have, let's say, the local bank gives, just disperses free money amongst everybody equally. So you end up with an extra 10, 20, $30 in your pocket, whatever it is. The amount of monetary units that are sitting there for the same amount of goods and services has now increased. Thus, people go out and spend said money on the same items that they bought last year. So, obviously, the supply of said items decreases while demand is constant, which should, in theory, lead to a rise in prices over the short to medium term. And the free thinking and understanding shop owners then increase the prices on their goods, seeing that demand is in some cases increasing with, again, when people have more money in their pocket, they go out and spend it. So that's all fine and dandy in a small town economy where the money is distributed evenly. Prices can really rise together so long as individuals or everybody in that system is acquiring the same amount of monetary units as everyone else. Prices can really go up really, if you think about it, everybody in that town could be a quote unquote millionaire and have $1 million in the bank so long as the new percentage of monetary units is dispersed evenly.
Yeah. And that's one of the famous examples is my previous neighboring country was Zimbabwe. And I like to joke with people and say which country had the most billionaires. And at one point it was Zimbabwe. They were billionaires in their currency units, some of them trillionaires. But that $1 trillion dollars of currency units, that's trillion currency units, couldn't buy you much more than a couple loaves of bread. And so the biggest thing that I think people need to remember and think about when you going through this process of learning about inflation is that it's not about the actual amount of dollars in your bank account, it's what they can buy. It's purchase power based, not monetary unit based. And whilst the kind of initial quick argument would be, well, if I've got more units, more dollars in my bank account, I can buy more stuff. And that's not necessarily the case because it depends on what you want to buy. So I want to go to the next slide that I have. Hold on.
Yeah, and a quote that I'll reference probably, hopefully, on not only episode 3, but episode 300. Milton Friedman, famous economist, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Again, prices really only increase based off of the creation of new monetary units unless you have what is called natural inflation. So, for example, if you're in this small town and the price of or the supply of gasoline is cut off for some reason, then obviously the supply and demand intersection there is going to ultimately result in a increase in price for the short term until said gas is then resupplied,
which would then bring the price down.
Yep.
Because now there'll be a oversupply versus what the demand was at that price. Mm-hmm. So a good visual representation would be this. Forget about the two circles at the bottom. We'll talk about Bitcoin a little bit later. But if you can picture the pink dot as being your money and then the black circle being the total money supply, and then what happens is new monetary units get introduced into the economy through the Federal Reserve printing money and other mechanisms. But you, unfortunately, don't get to benefit from that distribution of new currency units equally compared to other people who are closer to the money spigot.
Yeah, and back to that quick town example, say that, again, same scenario, same businesses, same amount of people, but the bank gives, say, only that money, that newly created money to 2 or 3 individuals, then those 2 or 3 individuals now have the monetary units to go out and spend and buy, purchase said items, thus ultimately increasing the price of said items, whatever it is, the gas, the shoes, the car, whatever, before the people who did not get the new monetary units then have to compete with the increased price of said item.
And a good way to kind of make that example hit home, real home, would be if you've lived in America for the last couple of years, 5, 6, 7 years, and you have seen and heard in the news that a massive investment firm called BlackRock are buying homes. And the reason they are buying homes is because they have access to capital and access to much cheaper money than the rest of us have. And they need to allocate that money. And so they will allocate that money and outbid the people that don't have the cheap loans when buying a house because they have the ability to pay more for it because it's cheaper money. Their repayment's going to be way less than what yours is. And they got that money through monetary inflation and creation. So they're able to buy these houses, and at a much larger scale, they start ramping the price up for everyone, regardless of whether or not you able to participate in the benefit of getting these new free monetary units.
And again, you did not see large scale investment into single family real estate markets in the US until about the late 60s, early 70s. And ultimately, wow, why? For the most part, well, dollars stored value, and you could exchange your dollar for gold, and it was tethered to something scarce. Now, when you have the common medium of exchange today, which is dollars, that is not tethered to something scarce, well, those dollars are going to naturally chase scarce assets.
Yeah. And so what that does, if you play that out on a longer time scale, is people that save their money and save fiat currency, they get absolutely hammered because the number of units stays the same in their bank account, but what those units can buy over time just gets decimated. And so it's the silent thief. It's a hidden tax that happens to people where they can't put their finger on it because they see the same amount of dollars in their account, but they just can't buy what they want to buy.
Yep. And that leads to a lot of socio-economic issues that people, again, can't really pinpoint. They see violence and crime increase. They see wealth gaps created. And again, politicians will very, very deceivingly say, hey, this is the issue, when in reality, they know what the issue is. We know what the issue is, but for a majority of people who have never really looked at this deeply and never really questioned what is money as a whole and what has been money previously, then you get kind of looped into these two teams that explain why the other team is the issue, when in reality, neither of them are really the issue.
Yeah. And what that does, if you just think about that from an incentive structure, the people that are diligent with their money and save their money, they're punished. And the people that go out and take these massive loans to gamble on different projects, they're actually rewarded. So the irresponsible behavior becomes the rewarded behavior because you get to benefit from this, and the responsible behavior gets punished. And so it's like this complete reversed incentive flowing throughout society where, the people just, banks and financial institutions, they're playing the same game that we are. We're trying to make as much money, or in theory, generate more purchasing power. But when you're playing at such a big scale, they start taking bigger and bigger and more irresponsible risks. And that's what makes the system incredibly fragile.
Yeah, it's all a game of efficiency, more or less. And I don't know, this just popped into my head. If you're trying to get from island A to island B, obviously you're going to hop in the boat that doesn't have any holes in the bottom of it. If you think about that and where you're storing your time and effort, and in what monetary unit or asset, ultimately you want to pick the one that is rather scarce and with good marketable characteristics.
Yeah. And so what this then does is it forces people to have to play this game of, taking these risks and making these bets in order to try and stay ahead of inflation or ahead of their monetary debasement. And so this creates this pumped up demand for the stock market because people now need to go and bet on the stock market because most of the people don't actually know what's going on there. And so they allocate their capital towards this, and there's this huge influx of capital that gets put into vehicles that are not sustainable on the hope that they can produce a return to be able to keep up with the inflation. So that takes us to the next question is, why does the government print money?
Love Dave Smith.
The answer is because you're paying for the war in Iraq. And nobody thinks about it like that. But that's really what's going on. They can't, for all the young people who are coming out of college now, and they're like, I'm 150 grand in debt. I have a gender studies major degree or whatever, maybe something better than that. But you got an English degree or something, and they're working at DoorDash, and the average house is going for 600 grand. And they're like, what am I possibly going to do? It's like the reason why these kids are all demanding socialism, at least on the left, is because, like, what else are you going to do? But, like, how do you? But the reason why that is the case is because your government decided to spend trillions of dollars on blowing up brown countries, and in some cases, then rebuilding them to blow them up again. I mean, this is the actual cost of the thing, and I feel like it's almost nobody outside of like the Ron Paul libertarians, the Austrian economics guys, almost nobody else ever makes this connection. That it's like, this is the deal. You can't be a world empire without having a central bank that can print money for you, because otherwise it just doesn't work. Resources are finite and you'll run out of them. And so you can't do that without having this monetary system. But the cost of this monetary system is that prices always go up and up and up and up. And that rigs the entire economy against the working class and the middle class in favor of the rich. It's just the way it is. When the value of assets is going up and up and up and up, that's great if you own stuff. That's great if you own stuff and you're selling it. If you got $1 billion in the bank, inflation is your best friend. But if you're on a fixed income or you're a working class person, it just destroys you.
And so the beginning part of that was he was actually speaking about the war in Iraq, and he said if they had to directly tax the people, the American population, that war would have been over in a couple months. But because they have this central bank and this ability to create money out of thin air to pay for things, it's a surreptitious tax that people pay for, but they end up paying for it in higher cost of living, and therefore stealing their ability to, buy more things and live a more sound life, where the government does this, indirectly to fund these crazy operations, for years and years and years. And just, if you think about it, when I was growing up, I used to read the Guinness Book of Records, and you would like read about the richest man in the world, and maybe he was a couple $1 million. I don't know, maybe a couple hundred. Now you got guys that are a couple $100 billion. It's like, how did that happen so quickly? And just because what we're measuring it in is, arbitrary units of paper, arbitrary currency units, pieces of paper that just get created out of thin air.
Yeah,
it's completely crazy.
I'm currently reading the history of money and banking in the U.S. by Murray Rothbard, who's a famous Austrian economist. But it is funny to see that reiteration that you were just speaking of throughout and it's really tough to try to gauge the total monetary supply during like the late 1700s and early 1800s into the 1900s. But you just see those numbers grow exponentially, like doubling like every 20 years. You're like, oh, it's solely on the back that new dollars being added into the system. And then you start to get into this idea of free banking that wasn't really free banking, more the government was involved, but to a much lesser extent than it is today. You just had hundreds and hundreds of new banks that were just creating new monetary notes out of literal thin air.
Yeah. And that's why, the things that you're wanting to buy. So here's another clip that I'd like to play real quick, just so that we can kind of get on the same page in terms of what inflation is. Because there's all sorts of, clever people with economics degrees, particularly Keynesian economics degrees, that'll give you all these definitions about what inflation is. But I think this is one of the best definitions of inflation. So take a look at this. This is our boy Michael Saylor.
Inflation is only 2%, or inflation is 1%, or inflation might be 3%. Okay, that's just a mistaken idea. What is inflation? Inflation is the rate at which the things you want to buy are going up in price. And what
inflation is the price of the things you want to buy going up in price. And so the way the government gets around the scam even more is they have this thing called the CPI, Consumer Price Index, which is a basket of goods that they arbitrarily, they control what goes in there, and they control what goes out there. And if something inflates higher than what they want the inflation rate to be, they can simply just take that out and skew the numbers. So for instance, let's say you like ribeye steaks, and the price of ribeye steaks, which I don't know if you've seen recently, has just gone crazy through the roof. It's
Trust
obscene.
me, I know.
I mean, I was paying $13.48 a pound, and it's now kind of like $19.20 a pound.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the last 4 or 5 months. So what the government will do, instead of having that count against them and skew the average to push the price up, they'll just say, well, people are not going to be able to afford ribeye steaks now, so they're going to buy ground beef. So they take the ribeye out the basket, the CPI basket, and they'll substitute it with ground beef, which is cheaper, or chicken or whatever, something like that, to kind of keep pushing the prices down, to say that CPI is at a 2% level. Meanwhile, all the items in the basket keep getting worse and worse and worse from a standard of living standpoint.
Yeah, and that was one of the things where I really started to grasp my head around the idea of like what the secondary and tertiary effects of money creation are. And then you really start to look at the traditional diet of Americans over the last 60 years. And one of those books up there is called Fiat Food, which talks about this deterioration of ultimately the nutrients in which the average American is taking in, and what that does to obviously not only physical but chemical interactions within development of the brain, physically. Like, I don't know, I just like, this was weird. I don't know, this was long before I ever went down like the money hole, but I was like, why do all these people like back in like the 60s and 70s, like everyone's like kind of tone, like facial hair, like all this. And then I look at like today, like even me when I was like a kid, like I did not look anything like, and even in like high school, like I was looking at like even like some of the high school, like older, like brothers of older guys that I knew who were like maybe 10 years older. I was like, these guys are like little built different. I mean, like they weren't like gym rats by any means, but like these guys are kind of built different. Like the football players in my high school, and like looking back at older photos, I was like, what's going on here? That was just something I had questioned long before money, but something that does play into it.
It's a thread that is, flowing through all of society, where you have stolen from everyone. You have decreased the standard of living in the important things, because those are the ones that, the prices you can't lie. A ribeye steak is a ribeye steak, but when you are able to reduce the quality of things and get away with inferior ingredients, to keep the illusion that the price is staying the same, you're just getting worse quality, and you extrapolate that across, the standard American diet, and you can see, just go look outside and see what's happened.
Yep, diet, and then also shout out to the Mises Institute I was listening to, which is a Austrian institute based out of I think it's Auburn, Alabama, I believe. But regardless, they do a bunch of really good podcasts, and they were talking about, one of the guys was quoting like fiat is a socio-economic juggernaut, and it's kind of speaking to this idea that there are things that are drastically affected by the creation of new money, and ultimately what socio-economic levels there are in multiple different fields. Like, again, for example, look how much harder it is in the matter of literally 20 years for you and your potential partner or significant other to raise a kid.
Yeah.
Just that alone is 2 to 3 times harder in terms of what percentage of your pay has to go towards that, compared to literally 2 generations ago. Like, and this is like a question that like I had faced. I was like, why is everything so much more expensive, but we live in the most efficient era that humanity's ever known? Now, what that could have really been if we were on a sound money standard is mind-boggling, but that's a completely different thought. But like we live in the most advanced time ever, but there is the largest population per percentage per capita of people that are homeless. Like, how is this?
And starving.
Literally starving. Yeah.
So 2 things for that. The one quote that always kind of, gets me to rack my brain is, if we can print dollars, why do we have poverty? You think about that. If we can just create money out of thin air, why do we have poverty? And that's just a crazy example. And then the next is thinking about, if you extrapolate this through the whole of society, where things are actually getting more and more expensive, and you have to dedicate more of your life in terms of its finite hours in order to earn an income to stay afloat. As you said earlier, having kids just becomes out of the question for some people. Owning a home becomes out of the question for some people. So let's look at one more meme that I have that I want to show you.
Yeah, and the Austrian school hits on the idea of incentives being very important, and ultimately, when you're working the same amount of time as previous generations in similar positions, but you're ultimately able to own less. Like, the idea of private property ownership is very important between the Austrian school and the founding of this country. Private property rights being very important. Ultimately, when you are not able to own as much private property solely due to the fact that new monetary units are created, that does leave a detrimental productivity decrease amongst a lot of people, especially younger generations who are pissed off, but they don't know why they're pissed off.
And if you think about your money as being private property, which in theory it should be, and money is private property, and that property is a representation of your life that you have exchanged. If that money can be debased, the government is able to steal your private property, in which case that is not your property anymore, or never was your property. And that's kind of like a trippy thing to think that.
Yeah, that's something that took me a long time to understand. Like, they are literally stealing your time. Again, you go to work for 40 hours this week, whatever, and you receive $1,000. Well, if the government then increases the money supply by 10% overnight, well, that $1,000 you have didn't increase at all, but you already expended those 40 hours last week that are now roughly 10% less valuable today than they were last week. So again, your time that you spent last week has now been stolen, more or less.
You worked for nothing.
To the tune of 10%. Yeah, but roughly, a half a day last week is now gone.
Yeah,
gone.
You don't know. They didn't pay you for that. It's the equivalent of your employer saying, "I'm now going to make you work, make you working 40 hours, but I'm only going to pay you for 36." Mm-hmm. And it just gets chipped away. And you
quite literally year over year, you get, in most cases, year over year, you are getting paid less in real terms and doing more. You're probably getting a promotion. You're probably having more added to your plate, or maybe the technicality of what you're doing is increasing to a certain extent. But in real purchasing power terms, again, back to that circle picture you brought up, your circle is not growing as fast as the total money supply. And you're effectively, and this is just cold hard truth, you are working for less while doing more.
Yeah. And that's the whole point of the show, is like, measured in what? You're getting paid more in currency units, but you're getting paid less in purchasing power. And because you aren't able to see the difference, you think you're making more money, but you're not. And you extrapolate that through the whole of society, and history's had a lot of warnings of examples where society collapses, because at some point the house of cards falls down, because you just cannot keep debasing and stealing from society and from a population. I mean, at some point when they increase the supply so much, people are walking around with wheelbarrows of cash to try and trade.
That's
crazy.
If you attach a parasite to your neck that is constantly stealing the nutrients and blood from your body, it will eventually kill you.
Yeah.
That is also a fact of what we are facing in the current monetary system, where eventually it will kill itself.
And we're on a path now of, as Lynn Alden likes to call it, fiscal dominance, where, I love saying it, nothing stops this train, because the numbers that, the amount of money, i.e. debt, that the government has created is in extreme proportions, where there's no ways they can raise taxes to be able to pay their debts off, and so the only thing they can do is keep debasing the currency, and it's like a speeding train heading for a cliff. It's going to go off.
You saw this last week, especially with the Fed cutting rates while even their term of inflation was up via the CPI. The CPI was up and unemployment is up. Usually when unemployment is up, they are holding interest rates.
Yeah.
Usually.
So they are now trapped. And that's something we're going to get into in another episode, is in terms of, principles of economics, because it's all pseudoscience. It's crazy. And in fact, Jerome Powell mentioned that the Fed is now looking at moving away from this 2% inflation, and they're going to do what is necessary. So they know mathematically there's no chance that they'll ever be able to get back to 2%. It's just...
Excuse me. I got that backwards. Usually when inflation is high, they're going to hold interest rates. And when unemployment is high, they cut interest rates, just try to stimulate the economy, to ultimately induce employers to taking out lines of credit or whatever and expanding jobs and or projects for jobs. Sorry,
but inflation is high and unemployment is high.
Yeah, so they're cutting.
They're cut, but they're. I mean, with this current administration, they're going to let inflation run hot because, they want
they have to.
They want the asset prices to appear to be, on fire, and so you're at a point where the stock market is at its all-time high. Everything's just crazy high, and they're cutting rates, but it's only high when you measure it in fiat. When you go and measure it in gold, take Bitcoin out of it, just go and measure it in gold. It's down in real terms.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the illusion.
You have the nothing stops this train also refers to the fact that, again, the U.S. government does have to at least pay out certain percentages of that debt that they have in terms of the payments that are ultimately due to the bondholders yearly. So ultimately that percentage of expenditures that the government is making per year, that percentage of interest payments is increasing rapidly because we are taking on more debt, which means more payments. Ultimately, those payments have to be made or the U.S. defaults on its debt. Obviously, you can't increase taxes, but so much without pissing off the population into potential armed revolution or vote you out. Yeah. And
first vote you out, then they'll be
backwards.
Then there's
maybe we should have already gone the other route, but regardless.
Yeah. I mean, that means armed revolution is not off the table in terms of. I never want to be a sensationalist and a But if you think down this from first principles, there's hopefully not, but there's a strong possibility that something's going to kick off.
Yeah, I hope that this is not the case, but it is scary. It's scary to people who have looked at this, like this is a possibility, as sad as that is to say. Like we are, I think there's a saying, like we're six missed meals away from revolution.
Yeah.
Like if people do not go without food for 2 days, there will be revolution.
You put a population under pressure, and human beings, when they're under pressure, they start getting aggressive. Mm-hmm. They just have to. All right, so let's kind of wrap this one up a little bit. I want to kind of drive home the point of, so 2016, 2020, 24, the average home price went up in dollars, 288, 328, 434, and I would say it's actually higher than that in a lot of other cities. And then when you look at it measured in a fixed supply currency or fixed supply monetary unit, you can see how it's gone down. So when people say, no, but houses are going up and it's getting crazy, measured in what? You're measuring it in piece of papers that are being arbitrarily printed? Sure. If you're measuring it in the hardest money in the world ever created, everything's going to go down. The last point I want to do, and this was a mind bender for me for a little while until it became glaringly obvious. The natural state of a free market is deflationary. And if you think about that from first principles, as humans, we get more efficient over time at producing goods and services. And if you have a constant, the decentralized monetary unit, meaning an underbaseable monetary unit that is used as money, when measuring in that money, goods and services will get cheaper and cheaper because we will have an abundance of goods and services and a finite supply of monetary units. And so
Yes.
I love thinking about that. The natural state of the free market is deflationary.
Yes, over time, it takes less labor hours to produce the same goods and services, again, or better goods and services in some cases. And again, it is very mind-bending because you are literally going against, I mean, not even necessarily what you've learned, but what you've seen for pretty much all of your life, in every society, all of your life. Like, there's no country that operates on a gold standard or a Bitcoin standard or anything like that. Like, everybody's only seen prices increase in their euros or their dollars or whatever else. And again, yeah, and it's a tough thing to break. You literally have to more or less like step back and realize, like, wait, there is a completely different way that the world can effectively work.
Yeah. You've been, certainly our generation, we've lived in the matrix where we've never seen prices go down. They've only gone up. And it's because you're pricing it in fiat currency.
Yeah, fundamentally, every year, I mean, unless I am missing something, and I don't believe that I am, but like fundamentally, the eggs that you're going to the grocery store and buying this year compared to the eggs next year, like, I'm sure that the supply is relatively the same. I'm
Chickens
sure the
haven't
demand is
changed.
none of that has changed, but somehow the price has increased, which is ultimately on the back of monetary creation. So again, you end up where the eggs this year are no different than the eggs next year. Again, the same amount of supply, same amount of demand, roughly, and you get price increase, which is on the back of the new monetary units that have now entered the economy and are being spent on eggs. So again, for business owners, when their material costs have increased, ultimately their margins then shrink if they produce whatever good or service and sell it at the same price, while not offsetting, again, the increased cost of materials or labor or whatever. So then they bump up their price, and that, again, economies are very, very closely tied together. A lot of systems rely on one another.
They're all interlinked.
Yep. And when the original producer in wherever increases his prices, that usually gets kicked right up the chain, bing, 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 until the final consumer.
Yeah. Everyone has to pay for it.
Yep.
All right. So, final closing punch. Inflation is not natural. It isn't necessary, and it isn't fair. It's plain theft, legalized theft, institutionalized theft on your time and your energy, and it's all because the government does it to fund their agendas.
Yes, you're right. And